Welcome to Higher Ground, a podcast that looks at the K12 leadership job market with a data-driven approach. Your co-hosts are Christina Greenberg, the CEO of Agility Search, who brings 2 decades of experience leading executive searches and meeting the talent needs of mission-driven organizations. And my name's Josh Zubrick. I founded Josh's K12 Jobs Blast and have been cataloging the K12 job market for the last 3 years. Now, stay tuned for today's pod. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to the Higher Ground pod. It's Josh and Christina, and we're excited to have you back. Josh here.
Christina, head of Agility Search.
And we're just excited to keep the conversation going. Today's episode is really going to focus in on leadership and really how K12 leadership has stayed the same, because it always stays the same. But quite frankly, it's changed since COVID and since our funding realities have shifted over the last year. So today we're going to bring you some thoughts around how do we sustain leaders in the work, but when we're also looking for leaders, how has the profile shifted? So Christina, I know you've been doing a lot of conversations in the field. I'd love to just hear high level, what are you hearing that people are saying matters when they think about leadership?
That's so important. I think, and I just had a conversation with my friend Nicole CC from Thrive the other day where we talked about this. I think one thing is people who are flexible and able to shift as things shift. We've always been in a dynamic situation in K12. That's just how it is. But I feel like everything's unprecedented and uncertain. So we really need people that can go with that can be flexible, that can be nimble, that have new ideas when new situations come up for them, and that are able to really adjust, whether it's to external or internal realities as they come through. I think the other thing is that we're in this constant push-pull between achievement and test scores and kids being successful, which is obviously incredibly important, and culture and support and social emotional learning and how we're caring for adults and for kids on campuses. And I think that we're asking leaders now to do both. And I think that's really good and important, but it does mean that they often feel pulled in different directions. And so I think thinking about how we can still make the role sustainable and achieve those various objectives is another thing we haven't quite sorted out yet.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I felt that in my last seat, right? So assistant superintendent. We were small. We only had 12 to 1,300 kids. We were at 5 sites. But to your point, there's this academic North Star set by your state education agency with a lot of public data that's coming out. And at the same time, there was just such a reality post-COVID of students and adults coming back to the building with unnamed and unaddressed trauma, right? And we were just like, yep, let's get back to it. And not only let's get back to it, let's close the academic gap that we experienced during COVID at the same time. So it's interesting because I've been hearing the same thing in terms of what is the profile of a leader. But in preparation for this, I started to think through that there were 3 words that have really been bubbling up, and it's calm, clarity, and focus. Like that is where a really good leader comes through. And it's also the ability to compartmentalize. Because I think you named it. There's so much chaos happening right now. How can you go in now, all the noise, keep focused, but then quite frankly, make the conditions to where the people on your team can also stay focused?
As we think about these conditions, what you said made me wonder, what do you think this means for hiring managers and leaders, or even just people that care about talent in the sector? What do these changes mean for how we need to change and how we look for people, how we support people, how we imagine these roles?
I think the biggest thing, we always talk about, and you and I speak the talent search, I'll call it jargon, right? So for people that are listening that may not be doing this day to day, we talk about behavioral questions. We talk about situational. Behavioral, looking back. Situational, what would you do in this moment? I think where I'm seeing the most success for folks is looking at the behaviors, right? What behaviors have you demonstrated in the past? And for me, it's really starting to come down to, for a leader, simplicity and clarity. Can you boil it down? Because at this point, the cognitive load of adults and systems is so spent that if you can't make it crystal clear exactly what you want and build coalition around it, I don't know if people are going to follow you.
I think that's a really good point. And I guess I wonder, as we try to select leaders and we're communicating with them about what these jobs actually are, how are we ensuring that we're representing them fairly and truthfully, but also giving some grace to people that they're not going to have every competency off the bat, right? And they're not going to have every single thing that we need right away, and that we need to be able to scaffold and build for them a coaching plan, a development plan to help them be able to be successful long term?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say I borrowed from our first pod, right? When I was doing work with a client where I said, hey, here are the candidate profiles of every candidate that we're talking about. All of them are bringing really unique strengths, and all of them are bringing areas where you will either want to hire additional people or shore up skills. And what is the connectiveness? I said, as my friends at Agility Search, right, would point to you, like, where's the connectiveness of taking all this information and building a 90-day onboarding plan that goes there? And also, Christina, I took it a step further and said, in the offer conversation, I would say, here are the strengths we noticed, and here are the opportunities we noticed. And in the first 90 days, here's what we'd want to see, and here's how we'd support you. Because I think, as Brene Brown would say, clear is kind.
I actually love that idea of doing it early and often, that it's not just like a several months later, but in the moment. I think that's actually a really cool idea. The other thing that I wonder your perspective on is just retention. I mean, I know you're always beating the drum of making sure that we're keeping our people, which is so important to keep our talented folks in the sector, in the space, working for kids and with kids. What are the things that you think senior leaders get wrong about retention that they need to be thinking about, whether that's for teachers, for assistant principals, for principals and their systems?
Yeah, I mean, it was funny. I just had a webinar about this last week. It was free. I thought I recorded it. We are all learning technology still, apparently.
That's okay. It happens to all of us.
It's like, I guess I'm just going to have to do it again. That'll be exciting. But what I noticed that a lot of senior leaders joined, and I made us practice the conversation about how to keep your people. And it was so funny, the themes that came up. Number one, participants felt like they were in trouble in the role play when they sat on the side of the teacher and the principal. They didn't know why they were there. They were like,
oh, because someone's like, I'm calling a meeting. And they're like, why are you calling a meeting? Oh, that's really funny.
Like, and I want to talk about this and I want to talk about that. And I was like, participant, tell me, like, how did you feel sitting in the hot seat? And they're like, I thought I was getting fired. They're like, I had the opposite intent of like keeping me. I was like, I need to get on the Japs bus this afternoon, right? No. So I said, hey, let's name at the very beginning. Hey, I'm meeting with everybody across the building because A, I want to hear what's going well. B, I want to know what we need to fix as a team. And C, I want to make sure that you hear that you're valued and I want you to stay. And immediately when I like modeled that and people started practicing, they're like, okay, now I'm in the headspace that I can participate in this conversation. So that's number one, it's have the conversation. Number two, frame the conversation. And then number three, what we worked on, and I gave everybody, and they came up with their own, a bunch of red herrings to throw out as the participant to see if we could get the either principal or the superintendent to go off course. And what we named was, we don't nod, we say, thank you for sharing. It's not an agreement. It's not a disagreement. It is a thank you for sharing, because we are thanking you for sharing in that conversation, but we're not going to also pass judgment, good or bad, because we don't want to informally endorse. If you're like, I want no more lesson planning in my building, I want to go in and shut the door. Thank you for sharing, right? It feels a little Vulcan-esque off Star Trek, but I think those were the three things that I wasn't anticipating in that conversation, but it was really, people felt like they were in trouble. They didn't know why they were there. They felt like they were saying crazy things and their principal was agreeing with them. And they're like, the first thing I do is go to the faculty lounge and be like, the principal said that we don't have to lesson plan. Right?
Exactly.
So
there's always a danger in agreeing to things.
Or, I always do the like accidental nod while listening. Like I'm listening and I'm like, oh no, you think I'm agreeing with you. And I am not. So that's what I'm hearing. What are you hearing? Like, how are your people thinking about how to keep people?
I mean, I think similarly, and again, this won't surprise you knowing me. For me, I'm always thinking back to process. So I think to even your example, I feel like how might it have felt different if we just institutionalized a process where every quarter I'm meeting with folks throughout the team to get feedback. Right? In whatever ways I am. And everyone knows in August, hey, we're going to be doing this. This is the cycle we're doing it. Here's the purpose of these different meetings. We're going to have a staff survey in January that's going to feed into my 360 evaluation, whatever it is, right? In February, first week of February, offer letters are going out for everyone that's on the team. And I'm going to meet with all of you to talk about it. Sometimes it's just laying out that ground map. And that's what we're telling people to do. And I think folks are seeing success when they're just really upfront about what they're doing. We're working with a leader where we helped place him this spring. He's the executive director of a 6-school charter network here in California. We had talked to the board in advance about helping them think about their evaluation process because they hadn't felt like it was very well done. We took everything we'd learned from the hiring process, about him and about the organization, fed it back to the board and said, hey, here's everything we've learned. Therefore, here are the themes that you want to think about in your evaluation process. The board took that in their strategic plan, created their priorities and goals, shared that with the leader and said, here are our priorities and goals. Can you make sure these make sense to you? But then lay out for yourself your plan and your process. And then he took that not only to make his own evaluation process, but then to do it for his team. And then to say to them, and here's the timeline for the data we're collecting and how we're collecting it and how it's going to feed back. And I just think process like that, it takes a little bit of time, but not that much time. He was clear on what he needed to get done. His team was clear on what needed to get done. And they knew what meetings they were having and why. And they knew that when their input was requested on his performance, why it was and what was going to happen with it, right? Like the whole thing is well organized. So that's sort of my underlying thing, is making sure that everyone's clear on what's going on and why. And then you are able to retain people, because often the anxiety is what makes people leave, and the uncertainty, versus just like, okay, we all understand where we're going.
As you start to wrap up, I'm wondering if you have thoughts about not the retention piece, right? But like beyond retention, what should a system leader be doing right now?
Oh gosh. I mean, number one is centering yourself. And I think this is not just system leaders, it's organizational leaders. I have to think about this all the time. I've got a team of 10 people that I got to take care of, right? First and foremost, before I take care of myself. And I think I have to make sure I'm in a good space, head space, physical space, everything else emotionally, to be able to lead, because it's a very uncertain time. It's scary. Government shutdown just hit today. I'm pretty far removed from it, but still government funding affects a lot of our clients. It affects our sector. Really, it affects hiring, right? And so there's definitely moments of like, ooh, how's this going to reverberate? So I think that all leaders need to be thinking about that. I think the second thing is having lots of contingency plans and thinking around corners. There is so much uncertainty. We can't even foresee perhaps, but I think the people that are starting to at least think about plans B, C, D and what we might do in those eventualities will not only help them be ready, but help their staff feel better if it's communicated to them that, hey, we've got a plan or we're thinking ahead to what could come through. And then you mentioned this earlier to me, but I do think there's a real thread around compensation and roles. I think we really focused on that when we were trying to get all these people in, and it was a buyer's market in terms of candidates. I worry we're slipping a little bit with that these last year or so, where we feel like it's much more that hiring managers are in the driver's seat. I still think for a lot of these roles, we still need to get the best people we can. And so we can't get lazy with making sure our comp is updated and competitive, with making sure that we're wooing people and convincing them why they should work for us, and making sure our jobs are realistic and actually well suited to the people we're recruiting. I do worry otherwise that we're going to continue to see some backsliding, and we're going to take for granted people will be there who won't necessarily be there.
Absolutely. Well, I'm excited for people to stay tuned for the second part of the pod. So do you want to give a quick intro before to let people know why they should be staying to listen to you and Eric's conversation?
Thank you so much. Yeah. So I talk with Eric Thomas, head of Charter School Growth Fund CEO portfolio, where he works on coaching and supporting leaders and CEOs and helping them think through the role of the CEO. And he also does a lot of CSGF's impact work. We talked about succession planning. We talked about how organizations can think ahead to finding and supporting great leaders, and what the role is of the board and also current leadership in making all that happen.
Well, everybody stay tuned, and we're excited for this being episode 3, and keep listening for future conversations that we have about leadership. So thanks for listening.
Thank you, Josh. Hi, everyone. I am thrilled to have Eric Thomas with me today on the Higher Ground podcast. Eric is a partner at Charter School Growth Fund, focusing on their CEO support and leadership initiatives, as well as impact work. Nice to see you, Eric. Thanks for joining.
Hi, Christina. Thanks for having me.
So, Eric, you're an expert in CEO transitions. And one of the things that I think people are really talking about these days is that in our sector, there's a ton of transition and turnover, and we're in a crisis moment. People ask me this at cocktail parties or when I run into them at holiday gatherings. And I'm actually not sure that's true, but I'm curious what you all are seeing from across the space.
Cocktail parties. That's amazing. You're talking with people at cocktail parties about charter school CEO turnover?
Well, education cocktail parties.
I'd like to get invited to those if possible.
Got to move to the Bay Area. There's a lot of great education people here.
Indeed. So a couple thoughts. I'm with the Charter School Growth Fund. We operate a national organization that our goal and mission is to identify the country's best public charter schools, fund their impact, and help them grow and serve more students across the country. So roughly, we work with about 200 different charter school networks, beyond 30 or so states. And we've been focusing a lot on CEO leadership and things like turnover in the last couple of years, especially. One surprise we found once we looked at the data, we felt too a lot of angst about CEO turnover and transition, which is a big deal. One surprise, though, that we found was that if you look at the overall percentage of CEO transitions in the networks we support, it's been actually relatively steady for about 10 years, 5 to 8% a year. And what we expected was we thought 2020, 2021, 22 especially, we would see these huge spikes. It felt like that was definitely the case, but it turns out it was relatively steady. We've had about 5 to 8% of CEOs transitioning in networks in our portfolio over the last 10 or so years. And there actually hasn't been a numerical spike over the last 5 years or so. It's been relatively steady.
So why do you think people feel that? So you're right. We all have this perception. I mean, I think, and maybe it's just because things feel tumultuous in general in the world, but why do you think people are feeling that even if the data isn't representing it?
I have a couple theories. I don't know. Traditional public school superintendencies, I think, did see a huge turnover spike over the COVID and post-pandemic years that we're in. So I think maybe part of it is leadership is hard. Leadership has been incredibly complex, deepening challenges over the last 5 years. I want to also say some of it's real, though. We typically see founder CEOs serve on average 14 years in their seat in the networks we support. And so I think that means also we're at a life stage of kind of teenage years as a charter sector, maybe, in that many long tenured founders are passing the baton to successors in their organization, sometimes for the first time. And so that carries a lot of weight. It's a big deal when a founder that has run a system or a school network for decades is paving the way for a new CEO. And then I think in some cases, transitions have been troublesome. They've been messy. A couple cases where a CEO transition didn't go well and the board was looking for a new ED or CEO within a year or two of the first transition. And some of that matters a lot in terms of stability and excellence for students.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense. I know. Well, and even if someone isn't technically the founder, like we're working with Democracy Prep right now, which I know is an organization you know well. Even though Natasha Trivers wasn't the founder, she'd been there a really long time internally, right? So it almost felt a little bit like a founder transition in the sense that she had been known by everyone and been a deep part of the community for so long.
Is a phenomenal leader. Definitely think, even if not founder, many of the CEOs, the job we found is so incredibly important but hard that we've been saying for a while that being a CEO or an ED of a charter school network is kind of like 3 jobs at once. It's like a founding entrepreneur who's scaling something very early stage, kind of a part superintendent of a traditional school district, but it's also nonprofit executive director. And it's a little bit of a mix of all 3 of those things.
Well, and I think in this current moment where there's political and compliance constraints on all of those areas, it also feels acute. You've got the post-pandemic learning loss concerns about student performance. We've gotten some of our states, I mean, I live in California, so that's probably why it's so acute for me, but some of our states and communities, there's increasing public pressure and political pressure on charters, on schools in general, but on charters aren't divorced from that. And then the nonprofit piece, I think there are questions about at a federal level, what complexities are going to come up for nonprofits. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of pressure on all those areas right now, for sure.
And I think we'd all say, the last 5 years or so have brought unprecedented level of kind of challenge and complexity and volatility, from a global pandemic to time out of school to all kinds of things happening for families and communities around the country. It's a hard time to be the leader of an organization and that many lives that you're trying to impact.
I mean, we see that in our selection. I think, like, when I think about the characteristics we're looking for today or the qualities we're looking for, I feel like, and maybe we were naive, but I feel like 10 years ago, it was like, just know how to run great schools, right? Know how to work with the community, know what great instruction looks like, know how to mentor and coach teachers and leaders working for you. And if you can do that, you'll be great. And I don't know how you feel, but I feel like these days when we're doing our leadership competencies and selection rubrics and all of that, there's a whole level of politics and fundraising and just getting along with lots of different audiences that feels different. And it'd be interesting actually to do a review of job descriptions. I'm sure I could put this into GPT or, competency rubrics of the last 15 years because I've been doing this and see how it's different today than it used to be. But it feels to me anecdotally that it's different. And there's a lot more pressure on those external areas. So thinking about that, I mean, you coach boards and CEOs all the time on succession. You and I often have the conversation when you're like, hey, I'm coaching someone on succession, and they might call you for a search
Yeah, we
or
do.
for other kinds of help. What are some of the first steps that you encourage them to take before they even talk to someone like me or talk to their community about the transition?
Well, first, we appreciate the work that you're doing and the ability to partner with you on all of this. I think a couple things. What we've seen in many, many networks, some of the highest performing organizations, incredible student results all across the country. Most CEOs in our community tend not to really think about the time for the transition until it's too late. And, it's kind of human nature in one regard. In others, it's the job is intense. And sometimes it's transitions. Good transitions take 2-3 years, sometimes start to finish. And so often there's a level of urgency at the 11th hour of now it's time and I need to start thinking about it and talk to my board. And it's like the first time some of these conversations, very delicate, important future of the organization, conversations are happening. So I think we're trying to do a couple things, is demystify and kind of take the temperature down of this is okay to talk about. It's okay to have a conversation between a board chair and a CEO roughly about, I think I want to do this for 5 or 10 more years. And often those numbers of just how much time do you think of this chapter of your legacy and leadership, how much time do you feel like you have left, and getting some of the temperature down around that.
5 or 10 years, Eric, you're so optimistic.
Yeah, that's the ideal. That's the ideal. We've also just found, I think it's such a sensitive thing to talk about. And so for a board chair, we hear a lot of times people saying, well, I don't really want the CEO to feel like I'm putting them under pressure, or I want to start doing a search for a new CEO. So it's kind of hard to enter that conversation for the first time psychologically. For the CEO, sometimes they're like, I don't want to bring this up with my board chair. They're going to think immediately I'm leaving and they're going to call Christina and start a national search. We try to lower the stakes a little bit.
Once Christina takes over, I lose control.
It's over. So I think the steps for us are encouraging CEOs and boards just to talk about, one, like a basic emergency plan, or you've been in the seat for 12 years, you might want to take a sabbatical, but who leads in the event of you being out of the office for 4 or 6 weeks, and kind of usually starting from this is going to be very, very helpful in the event of a crisis, but nothing is on paper. So encouraging just some basic emergency planning. Second, we try to help boards and CEOs talk a little bit more about what's the potential time horizon. Who are the leaders inside the organization who they think are really strong leaders? And some of those introductory conversations often we find are really high, they feel very high stakes. And then after CEOs and boards get in the habit of having them, after the first one, which is often the most fraught, it starts to become much more productive and important and lower stakes. What about you? What are you seeing out there when you enter into these?
It's very stressful as a board. And especially when you're replacing a founder, I found the hardest thing was there are all these things that you just take for granted they're going to take care of for you. Honest, as a board member of a founder, you give them a ton of deference, and there are all these things that they just know and know how to do. And so what I always tell people is to try to take the personal out of it, as hard as it is with a founder, because you're right, you don't want to offend them, you don't want to upset them. And yet as a board, it's a hit by bus theory, right? Like if you were hit by a bus tomorrow, what would we need to know and do? I love what you said about just be honest, be direct, depersonalize it. It's not about you and me. It's about the institution and how the institution runs. And then let's get really clear about what your job is, not what job a founder is, but what the next person who takes your job is going to have to do, like what the job is today. And then let's be really clear about doing a diagnosis of our internal team and seeing if we even have people who might be able to do that job. And I think, again, you just have to constantly say, it's not about you. It's not about me. It's about this organization that we want to thrive forever. And if it's going to thrive, we need to take ourselves out of it, and that's the hardest part. One thing I'm curious about, and you should say what you think, even though I'm on the call, you should say what you think. But one thing I get a lot of questions about is, should we even do a national search, or should we just look ourselves locally, or should we just run this ourselves? I'm curious what you typically say to people about that, or what are the cases where they should run it themselves versus when they should hire out help?
It's a good question. There's no one answer, like many things, that's right for everyone. But a couple thoughts that I think is, and I love your point about what you said last there, really resonated about what does it take for the organization to thrive for the long haul? And I think part of the challenges we all face in the moment are very much driven by most CEOs are best CEOs running incredible organizations with tons of talented leaders. Many say, I don't have anyone who's ready for this job right now when we really get down to it. Most of the new CEOs we work with who are in year one of the job tend to say, I don't feel like I was really prepared for this at all. And so we have this like challenge of the moment. However, when we broaden it and say, what do you want out of your organization 10 years from now, or if you have a child that's going to go here in a decade and you'll no longer be the CEO, people get really animated about what does it actually take to run an organization that thrives for the long haul and beyond anyone's tenure. And we grapple with that in individualistic ways. But I think that framing we all can agree on is super important where we want to be. When it comes down to search, I think there's a couple dilemmas within this. One is boards and exiting CEOs are thinking about who they have internally. It's very, very important. Ideally, that's multiple people who could be amazing CEOs. That's super rare. And so part of the consideration is who inside the organization today is interested and could be a great next CEO. Then there's everyone has this idea of, well, who's out there? And if we put a national or external search, how many talented people might be interested in this role? And then often it's kind of the board's calculus of weighing the options. One of the surprising things, though, is typically folks like you and others, search firms don't just do external recruiting, but can help with the facilitation of evaluating all potential candidates. And I feel like that's for a board who often is doing this once every 15 years and maybe has never done it for a charter school network before and could use some facilitation support on weighing the options. What does the organization need in the next CEO? And then how do we give fair shake and exposure to the great leaders we might have here and who might be interested outside the organization? Usually I would find most boards are looking for some sort of either facilitation or support on the external and the internal landscape.
They often hire me and they're like, well, we just want you to find candidates and we'll do everything else. And they sort of underestimate, and it's okay that they do, but the expertise that those of us who do dozens of these a year kind of build up a certain level of seeing around the corners of what could come up because we've seen it before. And also that ability exactly to facilitate. I always say we're able to be the people. So you can, as board chair or board member, actually just be a member of the committee and a member of the leadership body versus having to also run it yourself at the same time. Well, I know we're getting towards the end of our time. A couple more questions. The first one is I'd love to hear an example that might inspire people around a time where succession planning went well. Whether that was an internal or external succession, what are some of the lessons learned from that you've taken in counseling other organizations?
One current sitting CEO who has taken this on with just an incredible level of diligence and commitment is Mark DeBella, who's the CEO of Yes Prep Schools in Houston. Mark and the team are running an incredible network there, now K12 in Houston. And Mark is fond of saying, which is kind of counterintuitive for many people in our universe, that he sees the CEO job as 3 phases: how you enter, how you serve, and then how you exit. And his kind of admonition to us all is, if you exit badly, that's 1 wrong out of 3 on a test. That's a D. And we need to get...
I love that frame. I'm going to use that.
I can share the clip with you. He'll say it better than I will here, but he's basically saying that's a D in any school and we need to do better on the exit. And so probably in part fueled by a little bit of his experience coming in as an interim and then CEO of the organization from internal, his commitment is we'll have multiple people ready to do this job and to do it better than me. And so the exit of the organization when his time comes, it's not tomorrow, it's not imminent, but sometime in the future when that chapter is closing for him, his commitment is, there'll be multiple people ready for this job. And he's got a really incredible executive team and some phenomenal people there that they're doing explicit work on preparing with CEO level type roles and experiences and development. So I think that's a great example for us all that Mark is out there working.
It's also a good retention tool, right? It's a good way to inspire your leadership team because whether or not obviously not all of them will be CEOs of Yes Prep, but they might be CEOs of other organizations or at least building those skills and experiences. That's a great way to show confidence in people and commitment to people too.
Definitely. And these are interconnected a bit because the other, I think, is Bill Kurtz at DSST in Colorado. And Bill was a phenomenal 20-year founder and grew that organization to do incredible things for families in Metro Denver. Bill served for 20 years as founder from kind of day one all the way through. And I think Bill started internally working and thinking about succession years and years and years before his eventual transition. And so a couple things that Bill and their board did that I thought were really impressive. They had definitely a strong internal candidate. They decided to also do an external search. Board chair had transitioned out of the board chair seat, but stayed on the board and actually led the selection committee so that all of the candidates and eventual hire would get exposure to both this amazing board member who had formerly been chair and the new board chair and kind of diversified the experience and the lifelines and the people who had capacity to lead on that. They did a national and external search. The board selected Nella Garcia Urban, who was also working at Yes Prep in Houston, to my earlier point. And so Nella was there, I believe, over 20 years at Yes Prep, at a leader in multiple different roles in the executive team, and took over and just completed her first year as CEO of DSST, but had an incredible year. Increased academic outcomes in year one. They have a big aspiration for growth, and Bill and the board and Nella in the transition did a really nice job of some time where they both were on the site and on the job together for an overlap period. There's a handing of the baton to Nella where she took over as year one CEO, and a really thoughtful process and supportive board. And so I think the thinking about it for 3-4 years in advance before the day came, and then the level of support and engagement that the DSST board and leadership they provided was really exemplary.
I also think that it's interesting, the example of having a great internal candidate doing a search, and sometimes the internal candidate will rise and sometimes the external candidate will rise, right? And just that we're really trying to figure out who's the right person for this moment of this organization. I think is really important too. Well, as we wrap, what's something that people don't know about Charter School Growth Fund that they should?
This is a fun question. Let's see.
Demystify funders for us here, Eric.
We convened last year over 25 different leader convenings across the CSGF portfolio, from enrollment to talent strategies to academics to leadership. And so one of our goals is to share and spotlight best practices from across the CSGF portfolio and share them broadly, and then create catalytic learning opportunities. That's kind of our impact strategy beyond investing in the growth of high quality schools. So we've actually spent the last 3 years really laser focused on CEO leadership in the sector, and learned from 30 or 40 of the strongest CEOs in the last 20 years over the Charter School Growth Fund portfolio. So we built some tools and insights. We have a CEO excellence framework that kind of pinpoints what strongest CEOs do differently, and a host of different tools from some of the best CEOs across the country, from Julie Jackson and Brett Peiser at Uncommon Schools, to Tori Jackson Hines at Resurgence Hall, to Todd Dixon at Valor in Nashville, to Oliver Seacat in LA at Ednovate. So we're really excited about just the opportunity to see and learn from so many incredible organizations and leaders, and then distill and codify what strong leadership practices look like.
I love that. Well, and you all support Seminar, right? Which I know is doing a ton of work in the sector. Actually, my partner, Hadley, and I are doing a session soon about succession planning for the Seminar crew, but I know people really are appreciating that resource too. Great. Well, thanks so much, Eric. It's great to have you on Higher Ground. We will have you here again soon.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me, Christina.
Of course.